The sky above King's Landing was awash in the fiery hue of dusk when the first rumors began to spread. The Targaryens had returned. Most dismissed the whispers as wishful thinking from the discontented or the delirious. Soldiers loyal to the new order sneered at the notion. The royal family was all but destroyed, King Aerys slain, and Prince Rhaegar drowned in his own blood upon the trident. There should have been no Targaryens left but babes, exiled or hidden. Yet those same soldiers found themselves unsettled by a creeping sense of dread as the stories grew more persistent. A red dragon sailed for Westeros. A call to arms had sounded in the Stormlands. Men whispered that House Tyrell was wavering in its loyalty to the new regime. Some even dared to say that Rhaella Targaryen, the dead king's widow, had been spirited away before the sack of King's Landing and delivered of a son who was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. In the gloom of the Red Keep, the uneasy quiet was broken only by footsteps echoing in the near-empty halls. The truth behind these rumors was more extraordinary than any had dared imagine. While Robert Baratheon and his allies had taken the capital, scattering the remnants of the old regime, Viserys Targaryen and his pregnant mother Rhaella had indeed escaped. On Dragonstone, Rhaella Targaryen had died giving birth to Daenerys, but not before entrusting her last living son with a simple creed: survive. Viserys survived under the protection of loyal retainers who risked their lives to keep the boy safe. Yet the illusions of a carefree life in exile did not last. Robert Baratheon's thirst for an end to all Targaryens had grown, and the golden price on their heads forced Viserys and the infant Daenerys to flee under the cover of night. 4 years they scraped by in bravos, pentos, and the edges of the disputed lands. They gained a motley retinue of outlaws, merchants, and sellswords who saw opportunity or clung to scraps of Targaryen loyalty. It was a precarious existence. Viserys, a child with a king's pride but no army to command, had begun to show the same dangerous glint in his eye that had consumed his father. He was called the beggar king behind his back. Everything changed when Ser Willem Darry, an old knight who had once guarded the royal family's door, passed. His last act was to entrust Viserys and Daenerys to Illyrio Mopatis, who promised them a way home. Of course, home meant only Dragonstone or King's Landing, with Robert Baratheon's men scouring Essos for them. Returning to Dragonstone seemed too much a risk. Yet somewhere in that labyrinth of foreign courts and cunning merchants, Viserys found a spark of fortune. House Martell of Dorne had never forgotten the murder of Princess Elia and her children. In a sequence of secret correspondences, Doran Martell reached across the narrow sea. There were private vows, smuggled letters, gold that changed hands. Promises of vengeance murmured in the dead of night. And from that swirl of shadows emerged an alliance that would shake the 7 kingdoms anew. While Robert sat uncertain upon the newly won Iron Throne, still clutching at his war hammer, the exiled Targaryens began to move. No grand announcements were made, for no one wanted to stir the Lannisters or the Reach. Instead, the small city of Sunspear became a hub of clandestine preparations. Dornish captains were seen hiring sellswords under the guise of protecting merchant ships. Lawler worshippers from Essos found themselves welcomed, no questions asked, if they arrived with swords in hand and a willingness to fight. House Ironwood mustered men along its old border fortifications, sending out ambiguous messages about the need to quell bandit raids. Prince Doran Martell himself rarely left the Water Gardens, yet letters bearing the Sun and Spear sigil traveled across the realm, seeking allegiances among the great houses unsettled by Robert's swift victory. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Robert Baratheon was a king ill at ease. To win the throne was glorious. Banners, songs, the cheers of lords and small folk. But to hold it was another matter. The realm was shattered by war, and the Lannisters still prowled dangerously. Queen Cersei, daughter of Tywin Lannister, had been forced upon Robert as a symbol of alliance, yet the match was soured by the memory of Lyanna Stark. His council was filled with uneasy allies and potential traitors. Stannis Baratheon, his grim-faced brother, served as master of ships, yet rarely spoke more than a few words to the king. Renly, younger and far more charismatic, was master of laws but understood too little of the realm's deeper currents. Jon Arryn served faithfully as hand, though his age and Robert's restless disregard for governance clashed often. Peter Baelish, the newly appointed Master of Coin, flitted about the court like a spider weaving unseen webs. Varys, the Master of Whisperers, smiled softly and quietly collected secrets. None of them guessed the scale of the storm gathering in Dorne. The first open sign of rebellion came not from the south, but from the Stormlands. A young lord, nominally loyal to the king, suddenly declared support for the Targaryen cause, claiming he had discovered that Viserys Targaryen had returned to Westeros. This news spread like wildfire. Garrison after garrison in the Stormlands received word that a host of Dornishmen and sellswords was marching along the coast. Diplomacy was impossible. The new Targaryen pretender, if such he was, would not bend the knee. Robert was furious, brandishing his hammer and shouting that he would crush these dragonspawn himself. But one question loomed in the minds of courtiers. Who led this host? Was it truly Viserys Targaryen, the boy rumored to be madder by the day? Or was some other claimant stepping into the old line's shadow? Rumors abounded that Daenerys Targaryen was with him, though how much threat an infant girl could pose, few were certain. In truth, Viserys had returned at the head of a ragtag fleet of ships bearing the Golden Spear of Dorne, the sellsword companies of Essos, and a scattering of exiled Westerosi knights loyal to the Targaryen name. It was a paltry force compared to Robert's entire might. But Prince Doran understood something crucial. The realm was not yet stable. Vast swaths of the countryside still reeled from the war. Houses that had quietly submitted to Robert now wondered if they'd backed the right king. If the Targaryen cause could spark widespread unrest, they might fracture the fragile alliances propping up Robert's throne. Already, House Tyrell, which had once besieged Storm's End only to bend the knee to Robert after the rebellion, showed signs of discontent. Mace Tyrell had been snubbed too often at court. Loras Tyrell, a young knight of some talent, spoke with starry eyes of the old Targaryen glories. If a single great house joined the Targaryens openly, it might pave the way for others. In a sudden strike, Viserys' fleet landed near the Rainwood. It was a bold, reckless move. The Stormlands were Robert's birthright, yet the local lords proved surprisingly quick to capitulate. Some had suffered heavily under the forced exactions to replenish the royal coffers. Others clung to old enmities against House Baratheon. Still more were cowed by the memory of dragons. Though no dragon soared in the sky, the Targaryen name still held a potent mystique. And so, castle by castle, the stormy peninsula turned cloak, or at least opened its gates to the approaching force. Viserys, now taller, thinner, and with hair of silver gold grown down to his shoulders, rode triumphantly at the vanguard, his violet eyes lit with the fervor of destiny. Beside him rode the Dornish captains who guided the host. Behind them, in a litter, traveled Daenerys, a small child who rarely saw the outside world and whose quiet presence lent the entire expedition an almost mythical aura. Robert Baratheon responded as many expected, with war. He called his banners, dispatching Stannis to Dragonstone to secure any chance of Targaryen refuge there. Renly was to hold King's Landing, while the king rode out at the head of a fierce host to smash the invaders. The realm braced itself for another war. Yet as the armies mustered, the Targaryen host moved faster than expected. Before Robert could cross the Blackwater, Viserys and his forces reached the fortress of Summerhall, an abandoned Targaryen ruin. The symbolic resonance was obvious, for Summerhall was where King Aegon V had once lost his life in an attempt to bring back dragons. It was also close enough to threaten both the Reach and Storm's End. In this precarious position, the Targaryen pretender prepared to make his stand. Days of standoff followed. Scouts reported to Robert that the Targaryen force was not especially large but had dug in, fortifying Summerhall's crumbling walls. However, House Caron, House Errol, and several other Stormland lords had now declared for Viserys, inflaming Robert's fury. Even more unsettling, riders from the Reach reported large musters near Highgarden. It seemed Mace Tyrell was not sending men to crush the Targaryens but was instead watching the conflict with an inscrutable caution. If the Targaryens gained a foothold, the Tyrells might join them. If the Targaryens were quickly defeated, Mace could plead loyalty to the throne, blame the muster on bandits, and remain in Robert's favor. And in the north, Eddard Stark sat in Winterfell, quietly reinforcing the neck. He sent polite messages of goodwill but committed no men to march south. The Tullis of Riverrun likewise offered only words. Jon Arryn coaxed loyalty from the Vale, but the lords there remained anxious, preferring to see how the rebellion developed. The entire realm seemed to hold its breath. Viserys, within the broken halls of Summerhall, wore the trappings of kingship for the first time in his life. He had no crown, so a makeshift circlet of silver had been fashioned by a Dornish smith. He wore a cloak of black and red, embroidered with the three-headed dragon, and if the cloak's material seemed a bit coarse compared to what his ancestors had worn, none dared mention it to his face. He spent nights pacing, muttering about the day he would sit the Iron Throne. He dreamed of fiery dragons, of a grand coronation. His sister, still too young to understand the intricacies of war, watched him from a distance with wide, curious eyes. Their relationship was tender yet overshadowed by the enormity of events. Sometimes Viserys treated Daenerys with genuine affection. At other times, the stress made him lash out, his temper dangerously reminiscent of his father's. But for all his unsteady moods, Viserys commanded a certain loyalty among the ragtag group that had followed him across the sea. He was their rightful king, they said, the last real Targaryen male. And so the night fires burned bright around Summerhall as men sharpened their swords and prepared for the inevitable clash with the royal host. Robert arrived at the head of his forces, a thunderous mass of steel and fury. The Baratheon banners, the crowned stag on a field of gold, lined the horizon. At the king's side rode some of the greatest knights of the realm, hardened veterans from the rebellion. Barristan Selmy, his white cloak streaming behind him, uneasy about facing Targaryens again. Jorah Mormont, eager to prove himself. Lancel Lannister, a young cousin of the queen, seeking glory. Even more men flocked to Robert's cause from the Crownlands, from the Vale, from the Reach's lesser houses that wanted no trouble with their liege. Yet the Targaryens had an advantage. The formidable desert warriors of Dorne, who were motivated by both revenge and the hope of a Targaryen restoration that would place a martell on the small council, or even see justice for Elia. The first engagement was a skirmish in the fields surrounding Summerhall. Robert's outriders tested the Targaryen defenses. A swift Dornish counterattack scattered them, but not without losses on both sides. Over the following week, 2 more skirmishes occurred, each revealing that while the Targaryen force was outnumbered, it was far from incompetent. The Dornish and the Sellswords fought with cunning, luring segments of Robert's cavalry into the thick woods before ambushing them. Still, it was only a matter of time before the king's superior numbers forced a direct confrontation. On the 12th night of the standoff, a heavy rain turned the fields to mud. In that miserable gloom, word came that Mace Tyrell was marching with a host of nearly 20,000 men. Whether they came as foes or friends, no one knew. Robert was forced to shift some of his men to watch the Reach's approach. The tension became unbearable. Within Summerhall, Viserys raged, cursing each day that passed without a decisive victory. His Dornish advisors counseled patience, trusting that House Tyrell might join them if they appeared strong and unyielding. But Viserys, always on edge, saw betrayal in every delay. He demanded an offensive, though the Dornish captains insisted on waiting for clearer weather. At last, Prince Oberyn Martell himself arrived, commanding a force of spear-wielding Dornish cavalry, and told Viserys that they must hold a final stand, luring Robert into a disadvantageous field. Viserys, suspecting the Red Viper's cunning might overshadow his own grasp of warfare, reluctantly listened. When Mace Tyrell's banners finally became visible, Robert rode out to parley, wearing a simple steel helm and breastplate. The meeting was tense. Tyrell's forces drew up on a low ridge, green banners snapping in the wind. Lord Mace Tyrell approached, flanked by his knights and his proudest son, Loras, who wore gleaming armor with the Tyrell rose etched in gold. Robert eyed them warily, demanding to know their intentions. Mace replied that he marched to preserve the peace of the realm. Robert, seething, retorted that the peace of the realm lay in crushing the Targaryen pretender. If the Tyrells were loyal, they would aid him. Mace Tyrell, ever the calculating lord, insisted that the Targaryens be given a chance to bend the knee. They were, after all, of royal blood. Robert roared that the time for bending the knee had passed when they landed with an army. For a moment, it seemed the parley would end in violence, but Mace played his final card. The Tyrells had the power to tip the balance decisively, and if Robert would not at least pretend to negotiate, the Tyrell forces might remain neutral, but allow the Targaryens safe passage to the east. Faced with that threat, Robert consented to a half-hearted attempt at terms, though in truth he intended to kill the Targaryens. A messenger was sent to Summerhall with an offer that Viserys and Daenerys be allowed to live, provided they renounce all claims and enter the faith as wards. Viserys received the message, read it aloud in a trembling voice, and tore it to shreds. No, he would never again be a beggar king. After so many years in exile, so many humiliations, he would claim the throne or die. And so, with the messenger's departure, battle became inevitable. Under a leaden sky, both armies formed lines in the wide fields west of Summerhall. The ground was still thick with mud from the recent rains, making cavalry maneuvers hazardous. The Targaryen host was outnumbered nearly 2-1, not counting the Tyrell army watching from the ridge. But Prince Oberyn Martell and the Sellsword captains formed a cunning plan. They would open the center, feigning a weak point, to lure Robert's fearsome charge. The flanks, led by Dornish spears, would then encircle the Baratheon knights. Viserys demanded to lead the charge himself, but Oberyn politely reminded him that the hope of House Targaryen must not be squandered in a risky melee. Viserys fumed but could see the sense of it. He remained in the rear, flanked by loyal knights, with Daenerys watching fearfully from the ramparts of Summerhall's ruined keep. Robert's war horn sounded, and the Baratheon cavalry moved forward. The thunder of hooves mingled with the wet squelch of mud. On the other side, a ragged war cry arose from the Targaryen line. Dornish spears angled forward, Sellsword archers released volleys of arrows, and the first clash was a sickening crush of metal and flesh. Robert himself led the center, swinging his war hammer with the unstoppable force that had killed Rhaegar at the Trident. The Targaryen line trembled, parted, and Robert's knights poured in. But the ground was treacherous, slowing their momentum, and from the flanks the Dornish cavalry struck like serpents. Prince Oberyn, agile and lethal, led a wedge of mounted spearmen that drove deep into Robert's right wing. The Sellsword captains hammered at the left, forcing it to buckle. For a moment it seemed the Targaryen plan might succeed. Amidst the chaos, Robert roared for his bannermen to close ranks. Ser Barristan Selmy, torn by his old Targaryen loyalties, fought with grim determination, trying to spare as many foes as he could without betraying his king. Jorah Mormont, eager for renown, cut down a Dornish banner-bearer, while Lancel Lannister was unhorsed and nearly trampled. Stannis Baratheon, not present in this fray, had been sent to secure the coasts, so Robert lacked his stoic brother's steady presence. Yet the king refused to yield. He rallied his men around him, forming a tight knot of Baratheon knights that repulsed the Dornish. Prince Oberyn's wedge was forced back. The Targaryens, though cunning, discovered that Robert's men held a deep, unshakable loyalty. The line of stags refused to break, even as the battlefield soaked in blood. Observing from the ridge, Mace Tyrell and his host watched the swirling conflict. Some among the Tyrell bannermen shouted that they should aid the king and end the Targaryens once and for all. Others hissed that if the Targaryens seemed likely to prevail, it might be wiser to join them. Lord Tyrell deliberated, anxious to avoid a costly gamble. It was Loras Tyrell, young and bold, who rode to his father and argued that the old Targaryen line deserved support. The passion in Loras's voice, combined with resentments Mace had endured at court, swayed the older lord. At last, with the lines of battle still uncertain, Tyrell made his choice. The trumpet blared, and the flowered banners of Highgarden charged down into the fray. A murmur of astonishment swept through the field. Robert saw the Tyrell cavalry descending and hoped they had come for him. But that hope was dashed as he recognized the formation. The Tyrell columns were angling toward his left flank, clearly moving to seal the Baratheons in a pincer with the Dornish. Betrayal. A savage cry tore from Robert's throat, and he spurred his warhorse forward, trying to break free before the trap closed. The surge of Baratheon knights behind him carried them deeper into the Targaryen line, cutting a path of gore and steel. Prince Oberyn, seeing the Tyrell approach, urged his men to hold their ground. The moment the Tyrell cavalry struck the Baratheon flank, the entire field erupted in confusion. Robert's knights, outnumbered and hemmed in, began to break. Some galloped away into the muddy fields, only to be pursued by Dornish outriders. Others threw down their weapons and surrendered. In the midst of the rout, Robert fought on with a handful of loyalists, roiling with fury. Barristan Selmy begged him to retreat, to fight another day, but Robert refused to abandon the field. He had become a one-man storm, hammering through any who stood in his path. By the time Oberyn Martell and the Tyrell lords converged, Robert was surrounded. His horse had been slain under him, and he stood in the mud, hammer in hand, face smeared with dirt and blood, a ring of spears and swords leveled at him. The king panted, chest heaving, as dozens of men demanded he surrender. For a heartbeat, he seemed poised to charge to certain death. Then, with a curse on his lips, Robert Baratheon dropped his war hammer and sank to his knees. Cheers broke through the storm of death. The field of Summerhall belonged to the Targaryens once more, though the price in blood was great. The remains of Robert's army scattered, and the captured king was taken within the half-ruined walls. Viserys, trembling with triumph and fear, waited there in a makeshift hall. When Robert was brought before him, bound and forced to kneel, the young Targaryen almost shrank back. Then his pride took hold, and he stood straight, addressing Robert as usurper. Robert spat at his feet, calling him a beggar and a child. The exchange was tense. Some demanded Robert's immediate execution. Others urged caution. In that hour, another figure arrived, as though conjured by fate. Eddard Stark, who had ridden south with a small contingent of loyal northern warriors. The arrival of the Warden of the North had been delayed by the logistic nightmares of mustering and traveling such a distance, and he reached Summerhall just in time to witness the aftermath. Lord Stark's presence added another layer of complexity. He had been Robert's dearest friend, yet now found his king a captive. The Targaryen cause, bolstered by Dorne and the Reach, was ascendant. Tywin Lannister loomed over the western hills with an army of his own, but uncertain if he should engage or retreat to protect his family. At court in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister was either frantic or furious. Accounts varied. Jon Arryn had retreated to the Vale, refusing to watch what he deemed a slaughter of the realm. Chaos threatened to engulf every corner of Westeros. Even as the realm teetered, Viserys Targaryen pronounced himself king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. He took the ancient coronation words, "May the Seven witness my vow." The ragged circle of lords who had pledged their swords to him proclaimed him Viserys, third of his name, though some recalled that a previous Viserys too had reigned only briefly. In that moment, the battered field outside Summerhall became an antechamber to a new war, or a new age. By the battered gates, a small dais was erected. Viserys approached the captive Robert, flanked by Oberyn Martell, Mace Tyrell, and a handful of knights. Eddard Stark stood off to the side, a grim watchman. The young Targaryen's voice rang out, high and harsh, as he declared that Robert Baratheon had led a rebellion, committed treason against the rightful throne, and would pay the price. Slowly, he drew a sword that had belonged to Ser Willem Darry, glinting in the pale sunlight. Robert locked eyes with him, defiant, and waited for the blow. But at the final instant, Viserys froze. His gaze darted to Daenerys, watching from the shadows. Then he glanced at the crowd, at the hush that settled over them. His father, the Mad King, had spilled blood without thought, and that had led to ruin. Viserys' hand trembled on the sword's hilt. Doran Martell, who had arrived by litter due to his gout, subtly touched Viserys' shoulder. He whispered words urging mercy. Mercy could bind the realm more tightly than fear. Mace Tyrell, though less subtle, also counseled caution. Perhaps Robert could be ransomed to the Baratheons or forced to take the Black. In the hush, Eddard Stark stepped forward, calmly stating that a king who kills a captive in cold blood would be no true king at all. Memories of Aerys Targaryen's atrocities still haunted Westeros. The moment hung like a blade over Robert's neck. At last, Viserys grimaced, sheathed his sword, and ordered Robert be taken away to the dungeons of Summerhall until the king decided his fate. With that act of restraint, Viserys gained a sliver of legitimacy in the eyes of those who watched. The Tyrells and Martells congratulated him, offering loyalty. One by one, lesser lords arrived to bend the knee, some from the Crownlands, others from the Stormlands who had been uncertain until they saw Robert captured. Even a few riverlords came, seeing the shift in power as unstoppable. Yet not all hearts were won. The Lannisters, offended by House Tyrell's betrayal, readied their forces in the west, uncertain whether to fight or negotiate. The Vale remained aloof, as Jon Arryn was too old to lead another war. The Iron Islands stirred, smelling weakness on the mainland, and Balon Greyjoy's restlessness threatened a new rebellion. And in King's Landing, the pregnant queen, Cersei Lannister, stewed in humiliation while holding the city with the gold cloaks. Her father's army might sweep down to defend her, or might hold back to see if any compromise was possible with the new Targaryen claim. Viserys, flush with his victory, declared his intention to march on King's Landing to reclaim the Iron Throne. The news stirred every corner of the realm. Dorne committed fully, sending more spears and knights up the Rose Road in conjunction with the Tyrell forces. The so-called King's Road host, now numbering tens of thousands, wound its way toward the heart of the realm. Banners of red and black mingled with sun spears and golden roses, a testament to the alliances House Targaryen had forged. In the vanguard was Prince Oberyn and young Lord Loras, forging a somewhat unlikely camaraderie out of their shared thirst for glory. Viserys rode under a resplendent banner of the three-headed dragon, wearing his makeshift silver circlet, receiving the adulation of the small folk who came out to watch the spectacle. Some cheered, some cowered, but all recognized the shift in power. King's Landing awaited with locked gates. Cersei Lannister refused any call to surrender. The gold cloaks, however, were uncertain. They had no wish to be slaughtered defending a captured throne, but the queen threatened them with her father's wrath should they open the gates. Supplies in the city were ample for a short siege, but not for a drawn-out one. Refugees from the surrounding countryside crowded inside the walls, fearful of being caught between armies. Tension filled the streets. Whispers of the returning Targaryens spread, and some of the small folk recalled the cruelty of the Mad King. Others recalled the old prosperity under Targaryen rule. The old dragons had not always been monstrous, they whispered. Some blamed House Lannister for the sack of the city, for Tywin's cruelty. Many simply prayed for deliverance. When the Targaryen host arrived at the city's walls, they beheld a sight reminiscent of the final days of Robert's rebellion. Catapults were raised, siege towers assembled. Viserys demanded the city surrender and open the gates or face dragonfire. Though no dragons soared overhead, the threat was enough to unnerve the gold cloaks, many of whom remembered the horror of sack and bloodshed. Cersei, from within the Red Keep, raged. She wrote desperate letters to her father, urging him to bring his army forth, to crush the Targaryens as he had once crushed the Rains. Yet Tywin Lannister did not rush to the city's defense. He was old, calculating, and recognized that the Targaryen coalition was immense. Engaging it in open field might risk all the wealth and power of House Lannister. Instead, he extended cautious offers to meet Viserys' envoys, hoping to salvage a position of influence no matter who wore the crown. A sense of destiny surrounded King's Landing as Viserys prepared to enter. The siege did not last long. The gates swung open after only 3 days, when the commander of the Gold Cloaks concluded that the city would be spared if he yielded, and that the Lannisters were not coming swiftly to their rescue. The Targaryen banners rode through the streets, and the small folk lined them, uncertain whether to cheer or hide. Mace Tyrell proclaimed that a just king had come to reclaim his birthright. Prince Oberyn promised that any violence against the people would be met with swift Dornish justice. Targaryen loyalists emerged from hiding, weeping with joy. Traitors, or those suspected of being traitors, cowered in corners, awaiting retribution. Cersei Lannister was found in the Red Keep, dressed in regal finery, her green eyes blazing. The standoff between her and Viserys was thick with tension. She demanded to know what would happen to her and to her unborn child. Viserys, remembering how his mother and father had been violently usurped, found a cold satisfaction in forcing the proud lioness to kneel. She resisted until guards seized her arms. In the end, she knelt grudgingly, though her hatred shone bright. Viserys pronounced that her life would be spared. He did not wish to mirror the crimes of the Mad King. As for her child, it would remain at court under Targaryen protection, a hostage to ensure House Lannister's good behavior. Some suggested she should be confined to a sept to repent. Others whispered that she might be forced to wed some lesser lord. In the end, Viserys decreed she would remain under house arrest in the Red Keep, escorted by Dornish guards who remembered all too well the Lannister role in Elaya's death. Quietly, many wondered if she might end up in a Silent Sisters cloister or be executed if her father rebelled. At last, Viserys mounted the Iron Throne. The throne room still bore the scorch marks from Aerys' final days and the subsequent sack. Soldiers had done a hasty job of cleaning the debris, but the air was stale with old ghosts. Viserys ascended the steps with a mixture of awe and terror, mindful of the sharp barbs of twisted steel. In a surreal echo of Aegon the Conqueror, he placed a newly forged crown upon his head, courtesy of the Tyrell goldsmiths. A band of black steel wrought with rubies shaped like three-headed dragons. The courtiers gathered in a hush, waiting. Then, in a moment that felt both triumphant and precarious, Viserys declared the rebirth of Targaryen rule. He named himself Viserys of the House Targaryen, third of his name, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. A cheer arose, some in earnest, some in fear. Yet the cheer rattled the columns of the throne room, filling the empty halls that had once belonged to the Baratheon usurper. The realm was far from secure. Robert Baratheon languished in the dungeons of Summerhall, a prisoner whose very existence threatened rebellion. The Lannisters remained in the west, uncertain whether to bend the knee or raise Tywin's legions for war. The Starks nursed old wounds from the war, suspicious of Targaryens yet uncertain if they would fight for Robert again. The Greyjoys tested the northern coasts, considering a reaving spree or full rebellion. And scattered across the Red Keep were men and women with loyalties as shifting as the tide. Peter Baelish had disappeared from King's Landing on the eve of Viserys' arrival, leaving behind only an empty office and plenty of gold. Lord Varys, the Spider, melted back into the shadows, offering the new king a carefully measured show of loyalty. Grand Maester Pycelle quickly professed devotion, while others wondered if his heart still served the Lannisters. Viserys, untested and proud, sat at the center of this fragile tapestry. He reveled in his victory, in the splendor of feasts. Yet he was not entirely a fool. He recognized that without the support of Dorne and the Reach, he would still be a beggar king across the narrow sea. To that end, he elevated Doran Martell to Hand of the King, a signal that the Martells were the closest allies to House Targaryen. This angered Mace Tyrell, who had expected the position himself. To appease the Tyrells, Viserys offered to marry Mace's daughter, but the proud lord balked at the idea of handing his only daughter to a potentially unstable king. Instead, Viserys brokered a different match. He proposed that Prince Trystane Martell, Doran's youngest child, be betrothed to Daenerys Targaryen, forging a deeper bond between House Martell and House Targaryen. Oberyn Martell laughed, calling the arrangement a delicate alliance of babes. Yet he recognized the strategic brilliance of binding Targaryens and Martells for a generation. The Tyrell ambition could not be ignored, however, and so Viserys offered them a seat on his small council, naming Mace Tyrell the Master of Ships and granting Loras Tyrell a place in the Kingsguard, though many questioned placing a Tyrell so close to the king's person. This delicate dance appeased enough lords to keep the realm from descending into immediate chaos. Still, the question of the Lannisters hung like a dark cloud. Tywin refused to kneel publicly, though he sent polite letters acknowledging Viserys' ascension. The hidden meaning was clear. Tywin would wait to see if the new king faltered. If weakness appeared, Lannister banners would march in force to claim what they could. If not, perhaps an agreement might be struck that preserved the power of the Westerlands. Meanwhile, across the sea, news of the Targaryen restoration spread, igniting speculation that the exiled ex-king of Lys, or the merchant princes of Volantis, or even the Dothraki might test this new regime. House Targaryen, once again on the Iron Throne, was a momentous shift that reverberated through the free cities. Envoys arrived to congratulate King Viserys and to secure trade privileges. The coffers of the realm, however, were nearly empty after the turmoil of Robert's reign and the new war. Debt weighed heavily on the crown, and the Iron Bank of Bravos waited to see if the new king would honor Robert's debts. Within the Red Keep, Daenerys grew from a toddler into a bright-eyed girl, largely sheltered from the intrigues swirling around her brother. She played in the courtyard with Trystane Martell, forging an innocent bond that older heads hoped would unite two great houses. Every so often, Viserys would show her off to foreign envoys, speaking proudly of how the Targaryen line continued, though behind closed doors he chided her to remember her place. He was the king after all. Daenerys, for the most part, regarded him with a mixture of reverence and fear. The memory of his quick anger lingered in her mind. Whenever she saw him lash out at servants or courtiers, she would scurry away, uncertain and trembling. As the months turned to a year, the new Targaryen regime focused on consolidating power. Doran Martell, as Hand, painstakingly negotiated with the major houses. He sent envoys to Winterfell, inviting Eddard Stark to come south and swear allegiance in person. Ned, torn by his old loyalty to Robert and the knowledge that the realm might need peace, hesitated. He conferred with his bannermen, who were not eager for another war. Lady Catelyn Tully urged him to consider the risk to their children. Ultimately, Ned traveled south with a modest retinue, determined to see if this new king was the monster many feared or if he might bring genuine stability. The meeting between Eddard Stark and Viserys Targaryen was tense but civil. Viserys listened impatiently as Ned spoke of the realm's need for justice. In the end, Viserys demanded only that Ned accept him as rightful king, surrender any claim that Robb Stark might have, and promise to keep the North at peace. For his part, Ned asked that Robert Baratheon's life be spared. Ned still felt a strong bond to the man who had been like a brother to him. Viserys was conflicted. Some Targaryen loyalists argued that Robert was too dangerous to be left alive. Others, including Prince Oberyn, argued that a public execution might incite another rebellion. If Robert were to be executed, best it be done quietly, or he be sent to the wall. In the end, Viserys ordered Robert to take the black, effectively removing him from the Game of Thrones. Ned, relieved, agreed, though Robert's fury was said to shake the walls of Summerhall. He was forced onto a ship bound for the north, escorted by knights loyal to the new king. Thus ended the tale of Robert Baratheon's kingship, the once mighty stag reduced to a brother of the Night's Watch. The elimination of Robert from the political equation removed a rallying banner for discontented lords. Yet the Lannisters remained. Tywin Lannister tested the edges of Targaryen patience, refusing to come to court, refusing to offer his daughter or sons as hostages. At last, Viserys decided to press the matter. He summoned Tywin to King's Landing under threat of treason. Tywin responded by calling his banners in the Westerlands, preparing as if for war. The realm braced itself again, uncertain if more blood would be spilled. Doran Martell, not eager for open conflict, used cunning to orchestrate a compromise. A betrothal was proposed, Prince Aegon Targaryen, though there was no Prince Aegon, unless one counted rumors that Elaya's son had survived. Instead, the council suggested that if Viserys fathered a son soon, that son could be betrothed to a Lannister daughter, forging an alliance that might end the hostilities. The problem was immediate. Viserys had no queen and no immediate prospect of marriage. Mace Tyrell's daughter was rumored to be in love with someone else. Dorne was betrothed to Daenerys. The Vale was too distant. The Riverlands offered Frey daughters, but that was seen as an insult to the Targaryen name. The king's mood darkened. For all his newfound power, forging a stable union proved elusive. In a surprising twist, a hush fell over the court when a Braavosi envoy arrived with a proposal from House Velaryon. Though diminished, the old Valyrian-blooded house that once served as masters of Driftmark still held a certain prestige, especially among Targaryen loyalists. The Velaryons offered a maiden of their line, claiming that her Valyrian blood would appeal to Targaryen tradition. Viserys, enamored with the idea of a Valyrian-blooded consort, agreed to meet her. The match was quickly arranged, for the Velaryons had no illusions about overshadowing the Targaryens but sought to re-establish themselves as the crown's favored naval power. The wedding was grand, albeit rushed, held in the Great September of Baelor. The new queen, slender with silver-gold hair, spoke softly and carried herself with quiet dignity. Some speculated that she was terrified by Viserys' temper, but she played her role well. The realm, weary of war, sighed in relief as the king at last had a queen, paving the way for a future prince. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister's hostility simmered but did not erupt. He bided his time, waiting to see if the new Targaryen line would produce an heir. Beyond the Red Keep's walls, the small folk of King's Landing experienced mixed fortunes. Food prices rose due to the disruptions of war, and though the city had been spared another sack, the presence of so many soldiers put pressure on resources. Crime surged in the poorer districts, forcing the Gold Cloaks, now under a Dornish commander, to crack down hard. In Flea Bottom, the mention of the new king sparked arguments. Some claimed that things had not improved since the usurper's time. Others insisted that once the realm was truly at peace, the Targaryens would restore prosperity. Brothels and taverns found new clients among the Tyrell men-at-arms, leading to brawls with Dornish soldiers. Tensions between the Reach and Dorne were not easily forgotten, even under the Targaryen banner. But for the moment, overt bloodshed was contained, and the city breathed a cautious sigh. Months wore on and winter crept closer. The north braced itself for harsher weather, and rumors reached the capital that Robert Baratheon, now clad in black, had been dispatched to the wall. Some said he drank himself into a stupor nightly, cursing his fate. Others said he was determined to reclaim his honor by defending the realm against whatever lay beyond the wall. Eddard Stark, back in Winterfell, wrote letters to King's Landing thanking the king for sparing Robert's life, though no warm friendship existed between them. The Tullys in Riverrun likewise expressed guarded satisfaction with the new peace. The Tyrells returned to Highgarden, confident in their power as the king's principal supporters, while Prince Oberyn and Prince Doran resumed their domain in Dorne, satisfied that House Martell now possessed influence at court unrivaled since Elaya's time. A new wave of exiles and petitioners arrived at King's Landing, including old knights who had once served the Targaryens and had hidden during Robert's reign. Some carried old grievances, others carried hopes of reward. Viserys, in a fit of magnanimity, accepted the fealty of several who had been loyal to Robert but claimed they had no choice. He needed men to fill the positions left vacant by the purge of Baratheon supporters. But with each acceptance, he also made notes of those who might be traitors in waiting. The seeds of paranoia, inherited from his father, sprouted in his mind. He kept a close watch on the courtiers, relying heavily on Prince Oberyn for advice. Prince Oberyn, flattered by his closeness to the throne, began to shape policy through bold suggestions. He urged an expedition to the Stepstones to reclaim old Targaryen strongholds. He advocated for building a new fleet. He even suggested that a show of force against the Iron Islands might keep Balon Greyjoy from rebelling. Yet these projects required coin, which was in short supply. So the Master of Coin, an appointed Tyrell cousin, raised taxes, angering the merchants and the small folk. When the queen's belly began to swell, the court hummed with gossip. A royal heir. Whispers passed among the lords and ladies. If it was a son, the realm might enjoy stability. If a daughter, the alliances might fray. Viserys, though eager for a prince, stewed with anxiety and suspicion. He spent more time alone, locking himself in the Targaryen vaults to gaze at old scrolls, relics, and half-burnt tomes of dragon lore. Daenerys, now old enough to ask questions, wandered the halls in wide-eyed curiosity, following her handmaidens. She rarely saw her brother except at official court gatherings. She missed the closeness they had once shared in exile. Rumors told of a new madness brewing in the king, reminiscent of Ares. Some swore they heard him yelling at servants about waking dragons from stone. Yet many dismissed these as idle chatter or attempts to smear his name. The day the queen went into labor, storms battered the city. The wind howled across Blackwater Bay, lashing the walls with rain. Lightning illuminated the Red Keep's towers, revealing fleeting glimpses of watchers in the windows. Word spread that the birth was difficult, lasting long into the night. Maesters and midwives hurried in and out, their faces grim. Viserys stood outside the chamber, pale and tense. Doran Martell arrived, supportive yet concerned. Mace Tyrell, ironically in the capital for negotiations, offered prayers to the Seven. Hours dragged. At dawn, cries rang out. Some said they were the queen's final screams. Others insisted they heard a babe's wail. Then silence. When the maester emerged, he carried a newborn boy, solemn-faced. Viserys cradled the child, whose hair was almost white, and tears filled the king's violet eyes. The queen had not survived. The birth had claimed her life, leaving Viserys with a motherless heir. A hush fell over the court. Mourning and celebration mingled in a confusing haze. The Targaryen line had a new prince, a cause for great joy, yet the cost was painfully high. Viserys named his son Aegon, after the first Targaryen conqueror, a name meant to inspire the realm. Some found hope in the name, others felt a chill, recalling the tragedies that seemed to haunt all Targaryen heirs. With a baby in his arms and sorrow in his heart, Viserys retreated from public life for a time. He allowed Prince Doran to manage most affairs of state. The funeral of the queen was a somber affair, her body laid to rest in the Great September with full honors. Houses from across the realm sent condolences. Even Tywin Lannister, still unbowed, dispatched a letter of regret. In his seclusion, Viserys spoke often to Daenerys, telling her she must be strong, that they were the blood of the dragon, that they must stand together. Daenerys, unsure how to comfort her grieving brother, offered only timid words. Yet beneath his grief, Viserys found renewed purpose in his son's existence. He had fathered a Targaryen prince, a living symbol that the dragon line endured. As the months passed, the realm, while still precarious, seemed to settle under Targaryen rule. Taxes were high, but roads were being rebuilt. The remains of Robert's supporters mostly scattered or fled to Essos, with only a few pockets of discontent left. The Lannisters, though not kneeling, refrained from outright rebellion. The Tyrells basked in their closeness to the throne. Dorne enjoyed unprecedented influence. The small folk dared to hope for peace. Yet in quiet corners of the Red Keep, new intrigues began. Some worried that Viserys' mental state was unraveling. Others noted that Daenerys was blossoming into a gentle, curious girl who might one day overshadow her brother in popularity, especially if something happened to the new prince. And the question remained, would the Lannisters strike when the moment was ripe? In the 7th moon of the next year, Tywin Lannister finally emerged from Casterly Rock. He came to King's Landing with a retinue of 1,000 Lannister men-at-arms, their crimson cloaks stark against the city's gray cobblestones. The arrival caused a stir. Would he bend the knee or make demands? The meeting between Tywin and Viserys in the throne room was one of taut civility. Viserys, wearing his black crown of rubies, demanded to know if the Lord of Casterly Rock came in peace. Tywin, an older man with cold green eyes, knelt, but it was a brief, stiff gesture. He acknowledged Viserys as king, though his voice was devoid of warmth. An uneasy alliance was struck, with Tywin agreeing to a royal betrothal between his granddaughter, once she was of age, and Prince Aegon, or so the talk went. In return, House Lannister would receive certain lucrative offices, perhaps Master of Coin or the Wardenship of the West, positions that would secure their wealth and influence. The tension in the throne room was palpable, but for the moment, the matter was settled. Viserys, recalling the horrors inflicted on his family by the Lannisters, barely concealed his disdain. Yet he recognized the necessity of forging a truce, and so the Targaryen restoration gained a semblance of unity. King's Landing bustled with a new wave of trade. Ships from Bravos, Pentos, and beyond docked in the Blackwater Rush, curious to do business with the newly stable monarchy. The crown began slowly paying off the debts Robert had incurred, though the Master of Coin complained bitterly about the expense of the new fleets and the expansions to the City Watch. Streets were patrolled more diligently, though corruption remained rampant. Peter Baelish still lurked somewhere in the shadows, rumored to be weaving financial snares that might someday strangle the throne. Meanwhile, the Ironborn tested the seas, with Balon Greyjoy sending reavers to probe the western coasts, uncertain whether the king would respond. Yet a newly built royal fleet, commanded by allies of Mace Tyrell and the Valerians, repulsed the Ironborn. Balon retreated, temporarily pacified. Through it all, rumors of dragons persisted. Whispers circulated that Viserys was obsessed with old dragon eggs. Some claimed to have seen him at night in the cellars of the Red Keep, chanting incantations. Others said that Daenerys, not Viserys, would be the one to bring dragons back, for her spirit was more gentle and in tune with magic. A few recalled the tragedy at Summerhall, where Aegon V had perished trying to hatch eggs. Fear mingled with hope. None knew if the Targaryens truly possessed any eggs, or if they were mere legend. But the symbol of the dragon had returned to the realm, etched on gates, woven into tapestries, emblazoned on banners. The small folk told stories of Aegon the Conqueror, of Balon the Brave, of good King Jaehaerys. Some harped on the madness of the later Targaryens, but the memory of Robert's short, tumultuous reign loomed large. For better or worse, a new Targaryen age had dawned. Amid the swirl of politics and rumor, daily life pressed on. Courtiers gossiped about the king's next marriage. Suitors from the free cities arrived, bearing gifts. Viserys received them with polite condescension, but his mind was often elsewhere, fixated on ensuring his newborn son remained healthy and that House Lannister did not betray him. Doran Martell, ever cautious, continued to orchestrate alliances behind the scenes. Oberyn Martell grew restless, longing for fresh battles or new adventures, and occasionally clashed with Loras Tyrell over petty slights. Eddard Stark stayed in the north, rarely writing, but occasionally dispatching updates about Robert's stoicism at the Wall. The Vale remained quiet under Jon Arryn's stewardship, but some whispered that a young Peter Baelish had garnered influence there. The Tullis kept to their rivers, and the Greyjoys circled like sharks, waiting. In the midst of this precarious peace, Daenerys' name began to appear more frequently in letters from foreign courts. A princess of the realm, sister to the king and aunt to the heir, she held a strategic value for any alliance. Suitors began to come forward, exiled princes from the free cities, ambitious second sons of Westerosi lords, even the Sea Lord of Braavos' nephew. Viserys, who had once treated Daenerys as little more than an afterthought, realized that her marriage could be a powerful diplomatic tool. Prince Doran Martell reminded the king that Daenerys was betrothed to Trystane, but that arrangement was not yet formalized. The entire realm watched with interest, mindful that alliances through marriage might tip the scales if war erupted again. Yet for all the outward calm, the scars of the rebellion lingered. Fields once burned by conflict were only slowly recovering. House Baratheon, though diminished, retained Storm's End under young Lord Renly, who had bent the knee to Viserys but secretly resented the Targaryens for capturing and humiliating Robert. Stannis Baratheon remained a sullen presence at Dragonstone, commanding the island's fortress. He had submitted to the Targaryen cause but was said to brood over the rightful ownership of the Stormlands. That discontent simmered in private, though few spoke openly of it, fearing the new king's wrath. The synergy between Dorne and the Reach, while potent, remained historically fraught. Their lords did not easily forget old feuds, and though Tywin Lannister had knelt, Few doubted his willingness to seize advantage if the Targaryens ever faltered. Still, the realm hungered for peace. Farmers wanted to tend their crops without fear of armies. Merchants wanted safe roads and open ports. Knights desired tournaments, not the blood and mud of war. And so, for a time, the Targaryen banners fluttered from the towers of the Red Keep with a sense of renewed purpose. Viserys held court in the Hall of the Iron Throne, presiding over petitions and disputes, listening to lords and ladies who sought favor or justice. Sometimes, he dispensed it wisely, recalling bits of Jaehaerys' sagacity gleaned from old texts. Other times, his temper flared, culminating in harsh decrees. Under Doran Martell's counsel, the king refrained from repeating the worst mistakes of his father. But the line between caution and tyranny was razor-thin. As the second year of Viserys' reign drew to a close, the king decided to host a grand tourney at King's Landing, an event to celebrate the realm's unity and the birth of Prince Aegon. Invitations went out across the 7 kingdoms. Knights, lords, and ladies converged on the capital. The city buzzed with excitement. Stands were erected beside the Blackwater, a grand field prepared for the jousting. Markets boomed. Even the Iron Bank sent representatives to witness the spectacle and consider renewing lines of credit. Among those who arrived were not only recognized lords but also hedge knights, free riders, and mysterious travelers from the east. Whispers spread that some had come to test the new Targaryen king. Others came to see if a rebellion could be incited. The opening day of the tourney was a riot of color. House Tyrell's green and gold clashed with the Martell Sunspear. Banners from the north, courtesy of small delegations sent by Eddard Stark, flew near the Tully Fish. The golden lion of Lannister snapped in the wind, though Tywin himself remained at his vantage point with cold composure. The young Baratheon lord, Renly, had come too, though his face betrayed none of his thoughts as he watched from the stands. Viserys appeared in fine Targaryen regalia, a new cloak of shimmering black cloth embroidered with red dragons. He sat in the royal box, with Daenerys on one side and Prince Oberyn on the other, the child Prince Aegon too young to attend. Trumpets sounded, announcing the beginning of the joust. Knights clashed with lances, unhorsing each other in spectacular displays. The crowd roared. Wine flowed freely. Yet beneath the merriment, tensions simmered. When a Lannister knight faced a Tyrell champion, the stands fell silent, aware that old grudges might surface. When a Dornish lancer rode against a Stormland knight, the cheers became uneasy. Through it all, Viserys watched with a mixture of pride and wariness, occasionally exchanging words with Prince Doran. This was the face of his kingdom, a patchwork of alliances knitted together by ambition, fear, and faint hope. On the final day of the tourney, a mysterious knight appeared, bearing no sigil, wearing plain gray armor. He unhorsed several competitors with almost disdainful ease. Speculation erupted. Was it a famed hedge knight, a faceless champion, or even Robert Baratheon escaped from the wall? Impossible, yet the rumor spread in excited whispers. When the final tilt came, the Grey Knight faced Loras Tyrell. The crowd went still. Lance tips lowered. Horses charged. At impact, Loras Tyrell was cast from his saddle so violently that he did not rise for a full minute. Gasps rippled through the stands. The Grey Knight dismounted, approached the dais, and removed his helm. It was Stannis Baratheon. The hush was absolute. Stannis knelt before the king, sweat-streaked face set in a grim mask. He announced that while he had sworn fealty, he now proved his skill to demonstrate the Stormlands were not to be trifled with, that House Baratheon yet lived in honor. Then he bowed his head. Viserys, forced to react in front of thousands of onlookers, rose from his seat. He declared that the silent demonstration of skill was not unwelcome, but also made it clear that no one should question Targaryen rule. He awarded Stannis the champion's purse, which the Baratheon lord accepted with a clenched jaw. The moment underscored the precarious balance of power. Even a loyal lord might challenge the king's authority if pushed too far. Shortly after, the tourney concluded. Viserys Targaryen presided over a lavish feast, toasting alliances and praising knights. Yet the message had been delivered. Old foes remained a threat, alliances could shift, and the realm could still break. For the present, though, the Targaryen banner flew high over King's Landing. Small folk told themselves that the war was over, the rightful king had reclaimed the throne, and perhaps prosperity would follow. Knights drank themselves into stupors, ladies danced in swirling gowns, and lords conversed about trade and marriages. But in the corners of the hall, dark shadows flickered, as though cast by half-seen dragons, and a sense lingered that the Game of Thrones never truly ended. Still, with Robert's rebellion undone and the Targaryens once more upon the Iron Throne, a new chapter in the history of Westeros had undeniably begun. A tenuous peace settled over the Seven Kingdoms, carrying both the promise of renewal and the threat of old ghosts rising to sow chaos again. As the final embers of the tourney fires died down, and the city returned to its routine, King Viserys III Targaryen looked out from the parapets of the Red Keep. He clutched an ancient, half-burnt scroll about dragons, the wind tugging at the black cloak around his shoulders. His violet eyes scanned the horizon, searching for a sign. In the swirl of clouds, one might almost imagine the shape of a great winged beast, stirring from centuries of slumber. Viserys turned, his voice a whisper lost to the wind. He was the dragon reborn, or so he believed. The fate of Westeros hinged on whether that belief led to greatness or down the same bloody path tread by his forebears. And in the quiet corridors, Daenerys Targaryen listened and learned, her silver-gold hair catching the candlelight, her thoughts her own, her destiny yet unwritten.